Hello teachers! This video is going to talk about a method specifically for peri teachers. It's a very powerful set of ideas that has been formed into a teaching pedagogy, and it was pulled together, created, if you like, by this man here, Mr. Paul Harris. The approach is very imaginative and effective, an effective teaching learning approach that is holistic in its style. It takes a whole brain approach to learning that includes both left brain and right brain techniques. I'm going to do another video on left and right brain later. The best thing is it enables students to connect the concepts of what they learn, the musical concepts, and truly understand what they're playing. The result of this is you get real developed musical thinkers, which is obviously what we want. The approach, it connects the ingredients of music with analysis, and it combines it with performance. Rather than just learning a piece, you actually learn music. The result tends to be a flow of musical activities that are continuously achievable, rather than following an old-fashioned approach of the teacher taking the role as constant corrector of mistakes throughout a lesson. This results in confident, independent learners who tend not to give up learning an instrument. The holistic foundation of understanding is the cornerstone of responsible teaching. Okay, let's think about the typical model of teacher as corrector. This is what we desperately need to avoid within lessons. So the modeling and correction approach, whereby the teacher typically will show the student how to play a piece, then gives them practice materials, they come back, and then typically in the next lesson you work on bits of the piece, which is basically a process of constantly correcting mistakes. They might return again the following week having practiced or having not practiced, and then they basically play till we see another mistake, and then the process, the cycle of constantly correcting mistakes starts over again. If this is happening in lessons, it needs a big rethink. What this approach does, it reduces enthusiasm, interest, and definitely reduces the interest to practice. It's also not an approach that can be easily differentiated to suit different learner types. This approach often leads to what is known as bar one teaching, where typically you open the score, start learning a new piece and start at bar one. The student bravely attempts the piece, which is often full of errors. Soon enough they come to one big huge kind of crash of a stop, where the mistakes are too severe. What this does, it puts the student in an immediate state of high anxiety, which severely limits the opportunity for praise and effective progress. Remember the video I produced on Maslow's social needs and developing rapport with students? Here's the diagram as a reminder. This will impact on the student's perception of self, their self-efficacy, if you like, their belief to make progress. And this general climate of consistently making mistakes is definitely not healthy. So here's a diagram of the simultaneous learning approach, where you can see the piece is right in the middle and all the concepts are around. And your job as a teacher is to teach these concepts from within the pieces, and you start connecting them up to create a real holistic sense of understanding. The four key principles are, number one, that students are taught proactively, i.e. through concepts, not reactively, that is through mistakes. Students are taught the ingredients or the concepts of the piece way in advance of actually learning the piece. The ingredients of the piece are then connected, and finally the approach is non-judgmental, i.e. of mistakes, and has built-in opportunities for success. So the question now becomes, so how do you actually teach through these concepts? Interesting. So if I asked you a question, what did you have for dinner last Saturday? This is how your brain would work. Firstly, you couldn't answer immediately. A lot has happened since Saturday. So what your brain would actually do, it would do things like, well, okay, Saturday, yeah, that was the 26th. I was tired that day as I had an event on the Friday night before, a gig. So I woke quite late. I woke later than normal. I dropped the kids at their grandmother's. I realized I had no groceries, so then I went and picked up some groceries. But by the time I got back, I was exhausted. I remember now. I remember just ordered a pizza. I think it was Domino's. Yeah, it was Domino's. I prefer Domino's because of that lovely lava cake that they have. Yeah, that's right. I ate a pizza. It was a 4-cheese pizza, my favourite. Now, what your brain actually does to recall this answer is work through a series of concepts, time and place and other elements, and it successfully links the concepts to get you to your final answer. And learning conceptually through music is exactly the same. Imagine this lesson. You start a new piece, rather than going straight to bar 1, actually the book is nowhere in sight, there's no score anywhere. So then you might start with a pulse activity or a clapping activity. You might start improvising some rhythms. The rhythms will be, of course, from the piece. You might even get on the piano or your instrument and start improvising some little melodies based around the scale from the piece, things such as that. Then you might move on and play and sing some of the bars, perhaps concentrate on technique in this time. Now you might do some call and response games with melodic dictation, where you might change certain notes to try and get recall of patterns and such things as that, to concentrate on the melodic framework. By this stage, you'll be starting to explain to the students some of the ingredients of the piece. Then you might move on and do some question and answer, some basic questions about the piece, about some of the style indicators or the ingredients. Then you might again move on and start improvising some longer melodies, explore the scale perhaps of the piece. Play around with pitch, the melody, perhaps make some deliberate changes to the actual melody and see if they can spot them. By this stage, students will begin to hear parts of the music in their head. And by that stage, we'll definitely not solely need to rely on the score. Maybe by this stage, you could probably get them to start maybe singing parts of it in their head, parts of the melody, long parts of the theme or the tune or the motif or whatever. Now, you could stop here and leave it till next week. I haven't done all of those activities. If you've got a bit of time, now might be a good time to open the book and start playing some bars, maybe some of the more interesting bars. Definitely not bar 1, of course, unless it's interesting. What this then does, it leaves an excellent platform for practice. You've set the student up for success. They're ready. All this demonstrates the concepts covered and how you link them. Things like oral, pulse, rhythm, technique, the sound world, sound quality, elements of improvisation, memory, theory. All these have been learned simultaneously and connected before you even get into the score at all. This becomes a very, very positive musical experience for the learner. Students naturally feel happy and ready to learn. Even more so, psychologically, they feel ready to learn this piece, ready to practice this piece. Rather than simply being a process of constantly correcting mistakes, this then becomes a much more positive experience. The student will probably have an aha moment when they come to learn the piece. With all the concepts fully understood, the student will feel on a subconscious level that they already know the piece and they can apply these concepts with ease, and also in other pieces as they come to learn them, and also when they come to sight read, especially in fact in sight reading. When teaching in this way, the students rarely make mistakes in a lesson, and that process of constantly correcting mistakes, that model, is abandoned. Even if they make likely mistakes, you can predict them and prepare activities on that concept and really get them ready and prepared, so in fact they don't make that mistake. This also results in students learning a lot more repertoire over time. So within a lesson, you could easily include activities such as talking to the pupil, pieces and songs, ensemble work, oral work, listening, clapping, singing, internalising, theory, posture, warm-ups, warm-downs, technical work, scales and arpeggios, rhythm work, notation work, bits of sight reading, improvisation, composition activities, teaching pupils how to practice, teaching pupils how to evaluate their own work and their own performances, having fun. When you start connecting the concepts, students start to appropriately understand what the piece is all about. The pieces are in the middle because they represent the core activity from where all of our teaching grows. By using pieces to stimulate thought and work on any area of musical activity, our pupils really begin to understand the relevance of their work. And this is the essence of successful teaching, to make those connections clear, appropriate and comprehensible to the student. Each lesson activity is set up proactively from a point of knowing what the student already understands and can do, and each subsequent activity then follows on naturally, sequentially, progressively, and successfully. These activities obviously explore all the areas or the various features of the music and build in a kind of strong all-round understanding by the key musical elements. When preparing lessons, spend some time thinking about these connections, the connections of concepts. Choose some of the areas from the simultaneous learning model and think about how they connect. For example, you might connect pieces and scales. For example, the key that the piece is in. So pupils work on that particular scale or arpeggio first, then discover where those patterns are in the piece. Now you could make a further connection then with theory as pupils write down the key signature, the scale and the arpeggio. Then we might make a connection with oral, reading from notation. Pupils hear the scale and the arpeggio internally. Or you might connect sight reading and scales perhaps. Many sight reading patterns are based on scales and arpeggios. So pupils could do some work on the appropriate scale and arpeggio, possibly from the next concept, which will be notation. So you could connect that so that they easily recognize these patterns when sight reading. And this, of course, will encourage greater fluency when sight reading. In fact, the number of connections between the concepts is endless. You could also just choose a sight reading test that reinforces a particular rhythm that occurs in the piece that's being studied. You could reinforce this with rhythm games to ensure that the rhythm is fully understood. Write the rhythm pattern down. This could be an element of theory. Hear it. Hear the rhythm. This could be an element of oral. Make up a short tune using that rhythm pattern. That could be a composition exercise or indeed an improvisation exercise. Now they could hear the rhythm of the complete sight reading piece internally, which would link to oral. They could clap the rhythm. Play the scale perhaps of the sight reading piece. Maybe if the rhythm fits, then possibly go back to notation and also make use of memory. Try to get the student to hear the rhythm and the melodic shape of the sight reading piece internally first. Look at the first bar or two again for a few moments. Hear them internally, you could tell them. Then try and hear them from memory. Finally, then play the test. This will lead to much better sight reading. Here are some examples of activities you could do within a lesson to connect concepts. These things could also be set as part of practice routine or as practice starters and would certainly make their practice a lot more interesting. You could easily make these into activity cards such as this, or even practice maps such as this. When preparing lessons, these concepts would naturally appear in your learning objective, and then all the activities that you're targeting will follow on from that point.